we're very fortunate this evening that we've got Amy Wilkinson, who I have known through at least 2 or 3 different guises for many years. We'll talk about that in a minute. But welcome to everybody. And the subject this evening is about women. And can women have it all? Should they be having it all? How can they have it all? And how do we get there? What does it all mean? So can I please introduce Amy, and thank you very much for agreeing to be chatting with me this evening.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And I know I was supposed to come to a networking event and speak last year, and then had a bereavement in the family and wasn't able to. So I'm really pleased that I'm able to come and talk to you today, Debbie.
Great. So let's first of all, talk about how we first met years ago and what you were doing then, and a bit about your journey.
Yeah. So, well, we've met via Sainsburys many years ago. So when I worked in produce, and you were an agronomist at Sainsburys?
Yeah, and technical manager. So I was accountable for fresh, dominantly UK veg and spuds. But that meant I was also part of the produce team, and it was in various events that I came across you for various projects, really. And it was very nice to know you then. So.
Yeah, and I do remember you as being like Debbie, the agronomist god. And I can remember, I can remember you covering for somebody, and I had to speak to you about, it had been an apple or a pineapple or something, and something we had to do with a spec, and being terrified of phoning you up. And obviously you were lovely, because you are lovely, but it's funny, isn't it, how you get to know people over the years and you're like, why was I scared of that person way back when? But that's kind of what happens, isn't it, that whole retailer thing.
What's really nice about our industry is that we've kind of like known each other in different guises over many years, and it's great because you make that connection, and then you keep that lovely connection, and it's the people that you interact with that really makes your life, doesn't it? So
yeah. Oh, well, it's definitely all about the people, and I think, and obviously more recently you came on our podcast, the O for Food's Sake podcast, and talked mainly about potatoes, but you were using that as an example, and I know that was a really well listened to podcast, because I think a lot of the episode, I should say, a lot of the audience that we have don't necessarily have that specialist knowledge, so it's really great to have somebody like you that's got that kind of specialist knowledge on as well.
Well, we were talking about it from the point of view of using potatoes in ready meals, weren't we? Making sure that we sourced the right variety in the right time frame from the right stores, from the right suppliers, to make it easier and better to make the ready meal, and that's really how that came about.
Yeah, and I have to say, every time I shop for potatoes now, I think of you.
Oh dear.
And I think I'm going to get in trouble because I'm buying an all-rounder.
No, don't do that. No. Talk to us about your journey, though. So I knew you as working for a supplier at Sainsburys, and what have you done since?
Well, can I go back further, because it sort of helps sort of talk about the squiggly journey that I've had in food. So I did a food science and nutrition degree way back when, well, in the 90s. And when I first came out of uni, I was on a technical graduate scheme at Sainsburys, and I did a couple of years at that. And I think I didn't really know, I think a lot of us enter the industry not really knowing what the roles are and stuff like that. Quickly realised technical wasn't for me, because I'm actually not a detail person, and I'm not very good at complying. So it's just not for me. And I went into process. So process development in the factory, scaling up trials. First job was in a sandwich factory, which is like baptism of fire. You're constantly launching things, working all the hours across multiple shifts, because it's such short shelf life. But it was great, a great grounding, I think, for the rest of my career, because I got that exposure in the factory, which frankly is where it's all at if you're going to have your career in food manufacturing, which has helped me, even when latterly I've had marketing roles and all sorts, but actually that grassroots understanding the factory really, really helped me. So I did that for a few years. Then I decided I wanted to more the concept development side of things. So I moved across into a hybrid role. At the time, that was Geest. It latterly became Bakkavor, and I trained in the evenings. I did my chef's qualifications in the evenings. There's a running theme. I always feel like I have to get a qualification in everything I do. And I did that for a number of years. Absolutely loved working in MPD. And I think my heart has always been around MPD. Did it for a number of years, left Bakkavor because the factory, it was a ready meals factory and they closed the site. Moved into produce, which is where I met you, and so that was prepared produce supplier. And I went in MPD. I was head of MPD. Looked. There was a couple of different sites, one in Corby, one in Newcastle. I was up and down the motorway a lot, and I made the decision at that point. So I'd already done technical process MPD. I get bored quite easily, I think, because I was like, actually, I want to do something else. I think partly because in MPD it can be quite difficult in something like produce, where it's like, how else can we cut this up, and what different combination of 8 fruits can we put in a pot? So there was a bit of that, but also I wanted to be the centre. I felt like I needed to be the centre of the action. I wanted to be the centre of the action. So I moved across into a commercial role. That's definitely the centre of the action, particularly in produce. So you know what it's like, Debbie, like constant supply issues. I was getting phone calls from the factory at 6 o'clock in the morning saying the pineapples are stuck in the port in Felixstowe. I was getting phone calls at 10 o'clock at night saying, we've shorted the order, just life in the food industry, really. And I did that role for 5 years. And in that time, I had a lot of other stuff going on in my life. I was getting married. I'd lost a lot of weight. So I was exercising 6-7 times a week, and I had lots of just life stress going on, moved house, all of that sort of stuff. And basically it culminated in a burnout for me. So mental and physical burnout. And it was really quite scary because I was bedbound for a little bit. But at that point, sort of 2 things happened. I discovered coaching because I got myself a health coach at that point. And I also decided I didn't want to go back into a commercial role where you're just firefighting every day. Like my body had been under so much stress, like my nervous system was broken and it needed to repair. So I moved across into a marketing / category management role, because actually what that meant was I could do all the bits of the commercial job that I loved, which was growing the sales, doing the marketing side of things, understanding the consumer, but I didn't have like that constant. I mean, I still get palpitations when I hear a certain Nokia mobile phone ring that was the procurement manager or the factory manager or whatever. So I made that decision. So I moved into that role, went back to Bakkavor, had many happy years at Bakkavor working in marketing, but I always had this little kind of itch that I wanted to do more, because I took a step down when I moved from the commercial role. So I was in a senior management role, took the step down. It was the right thing for my health at the time. And like I say, I discovered coaching. I had a health coach. I started to really understand everything about how burnout happens, why it happens. Loads of, like, so many personal development books I've read, like you can see a load of them behind me here. Did all this personal development stuff alongside the day job. And then 3 years ago, almost to the day actually, I'd been furloughed as part of lockdown, as many people were, and that was a bit of a what's the word I'm looking for? I guess demoralizing, like it just, I think I'd always said, when I went and did a food degree and everything, I was like, I want to work in food because there'll always be a job in food, because everybody always needs to eat. And that's what I'd always told myself. And that was part of the reason I moved into commercial, because it was the last recession and it felt like a safer job. So when we were furloughed, I was a bit like, ego dented, I'm not going to lie. But what it did do is it gave me a lot of time and space to think about what I really wanted. And I had an 18-month-old daughter at the time. And I'd like to say, I had loads of headspace, but obviously I was just looking after her, locked down in a tiny house. But it gave me the space away from work. And this time, 3 years ago, our department went into consultation, and it was the first time, it happens quite a lot in big manufacturers, but it was the first time they gave you the option to not apply for your job. And I just thought, it's now or never. Like, this is an opportunity. I didn't even really know what I was going to do. I just knew I wanted to forge my own path and do something different. So I took the opportunity, took voluntary redundancy, and became a coach. So at the time, I did another qualification in coaching. And now what I do, and it's evolving all the time, but I started out by coaching women one-to-one. So women in the food industry, helping women to be more confident in themselves, to be more resilient, and to speak up a bit more so that they can get the recognition they deserve in their careers, and to do that without the burnout. It's almost like all the things I wish I'd known back then, I help women with now. Because the reality is, it is an amazing industry to work in. I love it, but it's flipping hard work sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's male dominated and all of those things. So
I like your comment about coaching women, to give them the confidence and the self-confidence, self-belief to enable them, really. Because if you think about it, going back when you and I met, a resource like you didn't really exist.
No.
And actually there hadn't really been enough thought about, we were talking just before we went on air about the longevity of roles and the fact that roles churn and change really quickly. And that won't change, because the food industry is dynamic for lots of reasons. But we don't really prepare necessarily our team members for the do differently and for the change. And actually what's got better is empowering people to, with your sort of lived experience and your coaching experience, to actually not so much feedback, but add to how those roles evolve and where we're all going. Because otherwise you just finish up like on a hamster wheel churning, and then burnout happens.
Yeah, and and it's very easy, like in your career, to end up in a place and be like, how did I end up here? Because another thing we were talking about is, if you find it hard to say no to things, and every time you're asked to do something, or we've got this great opportunity for you, it's a sidestep, or it's a this, that, and the other, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, I'm not sure how I'm doing this job, why I'm doing this job, because this is not what my dream was, So I think
we were talking about constructive ways of saying no, weren't we? We were talking about, in effect, sort of having the right to speak up and say, right, well, if we're going to do it, we ought to do it differently. And this is an idea of how we could do it differently, because that's not saying no, but that's giving a solution to what the problem is. Because you can't just say no. There's got to be a way out, as it were, or a solution, or a part solution.
Yeah, I think you've got to have solutions, or you've got to, we've got a whole podcast episode on it, so I haven't mentioned the podcast properly yet, but we launched a couple of years ago. So 2 years ago, me and Lucy Wager, who I know you've had on previously, launched the Oh for Food's Sake podcast, and that gives that free resource to everybody, really. And I know I talk about that I work with women, but actually, as my business has expanded, yes, my one-to-one clients tend to be women. I don't exclusively work with women, but I work a lot with teams now about all of this stuff. Like, how do you push back, and how do you say no without looking like you're obstructive? Or how do you work out what are the things that you should say no to and what are the things that you should say yes to? Like, it's all of those. It's all the skills that you need to succeed that no one blooming teaches you.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, you've got to have lived experience to draw on, but to make the better of. One of the things that you and I will remember from Sainsburys is they did actually have a lovely way of working that said leave it on the wave behind. So there was a culture of, okay, not everything is going to go right. So, sometimes more said than done, but not everything is going to go right. And if things do go wrong, the important thing is that you go forwards and you make lots of decisions going forwards. And you don't constantly look back and you don't blame backwards. So if you can get into that kind of culture where you do leave things on the wave behind, it is a more positive, forward-facing, changing, appropriate culture, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is that reframing all of those, the difficult things that we do have to face all the time. If you can reframe them, that can really help as well.
And there's a comment from one of the listeners tonight about the challenge that women have, perhaps sometimes in a male-dominated arena, where without being funny, the males will do what they want to do because they always have done, and sometimes the females around them finish up doing far too many jobs, because as a team you've got to get the jobs done. And I totally resonate with the you think you have to be Superwoman, and you finish up burning yourself daft just trying to do the do. And actually, to your point, Amy, it was about, well, when you're running that fast, you have got to stop and reframe it, because otherwise, But it's where you have the confidence and the power and the right to challenge, particularly if you're
and I don't even know if it is just about confidence. I think it's I do think that there is a part of us that just expects it of ourselves as women. And I'm not putting the blame on women. What I'm saying is, I think we've been brought up to be helpful, to be superwomen, and therefore, like, if I look back, and that comment about looking after lots of retailers while male colleagues looked after one, for me, when I suffered the burnout, there was two or three female commercial managers, so I wasn't on my own, but I did feel like I was competing with the men. And honestly, they were sat in the corner watching flipping Wimbledon on their laptops, and there's me working till whatever time at night, doing way too much. And that, I think, there, to your point as well, I think there's lots of things that go on, like the basically like the office housework ends up being put towards women. So taking the meeting notes, booking the meeting rooms. I used to plate up lunches all the time. Like, what am I doing? Like, I was paid too much to do that, but I was still doing it. And it all pushes back your ability to either raise your profile or get that headspace that we're talking about to go, what is it that I should be prioritizing? And like I say, I'm not putting the blame on women, but I think we end up doing it because we were brought up in by mothers and other women that we saw that were being superwomen as well.
I was definitely brought up in a culture where my mother and my aunties would train me to be a good woman. Which meant that if there was any social event at any level, it was my job to make sure that everybody was happy, everybody had food, etc. That the washing up was being done, all of that stuff. You just trained from an early age, and I'd like to think I've got a son and a daughter, and another son and a daughter, and I'd like to think they're all fairly equal at doing stuff, because I've tried to make them. It's going to take time to shift that, because it is a big deal.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, is we were, and this comes on to that women can have it all thing. I think we were given mixed messages. It's like, you can have it all, you can have the career, you can have the family, you can have this, that, and the other. But the reality is, you can't do it all. You can't do all of those things without completely frazzling yourself. And I know my mum was a feminist. She burnt her bra in the 60s or whatever. But I was talking to her yesterday, and she worked in the family business, and she worked 9 till 3. Well, whatever, like 9:30 till 2:30. and I can tell you, I try and do that on a Friday, and you cannot get any flipping work done. You know, so we're brought up, you know, I think there is a sort of, I feel like we're in that generation that was told we could have it all, but then still had the role models in front of us that were doing all of the domestic housework and running the family and so therefore the message is we've got to do all of those things, and it's just not sustainable.
Yeah, I think there are also two things with working with male colleagues that struck me. One is there is a male colleague culture in many businesses, which I hope is getting better now. But certainly I can think back to 2 businesses I worked in where there was definitely a culture. They had chat about football or about cricket,
you were going to say football,
which really wasn't where I was coming from. But they also had a sort of a daily routine where they did stuff, but they also had, in effect, office downtime, which never seemed to happen in my world. And then there's the other elephant in the room, which we should talk about at some stage, which is actually almost direct bullying, which again, I hope it's getting better, but you and I will have both experienced it. And
and I would say that happens with men and women. You know, like women, it is not gender specific. It can feel harder coming from a man towards a woman because I think men, and this is a conversation I've had with a lot of women, when you're in, like, say, in a pack house or in a factory, it can feel really intimidating when a man is physically that much bigger than you and they're, you know, shouting the odds or whatever. So that can feel worse. But I also work with a lot of women who have had female bosses that have bullied them, you know, and that's upsetting, you know, it's disappointing because I think we have to support each other as women in the industry. And I understand why it happens, you know. I think there has been a culture, you know, it's that you have to be superwoman, you have to be competitive to get anywhere because you're in that male-dominated environment, but you can do it whilst being kind as well.
Yes, you can do it. I think that's the point, to whatever position you're in, to be kind. It is not good when people aren't kind. And the problem with bullying is, if you are being bullied, what can you do about it? And who can you talk to? And it is about finding an ally and finding a way to flag it in some way that things change.
And what I would also say is, because we got a lady called Lynn Ingram on the podcast, because we were getting lots of people messaging us on the podcast about bullying, and felt really like we were underqualified to discuss it, which is what we always do on the podcast. Like, we're like, we'll find an expert. And she came on, and because bullying is quite a difficult one because it's a bit of a grey area in the law. But if you are being bullied for one of what they call the protected characteristics, so because you're a woman, because you're gay, because you're disabled, any of those things, then, you know, it's against the law. So I always give that advice to people, to get legal advice if you really feel like you're not sure whether you've got a case or not.
But it's more the subtle stuff of you will do this because, and how do you actually turn that into a better working relationship, or how can you help turn that into a better relationship? I can think of if you know, you go back to my life in working in retail, there's some I think it is a lot, or I believe it is a lot better now, but at one stage buyers could be quite difficult to work with at times, and they would see technical not necessarily as an equal partner, and actually over time that has changed, and the better buyers see technical as an absolute opportunity to make the most of things and to do more, and that work. And it's just by finding examples, but also occasionally asking to move. You know, that there are horses for courses, and it's certainly not an easy area. But to your point, it's about giving people the confidence and the right and the self-belief to ask the right questions of the right people.
So
and
I do think if you are in that situation, talking to a trusted friend or colleague can really help, because I think if you're in a situation where you're being bullied, or you might be being bullied, because again, it's like, how do you know, what's the definition? to have somebody as that yardstick that says, yeah, no, that's not okay. Like the way they're talking to you is not okay. And even, you know, if you can be brave enough to have that conversation with that person, it all depends on the nuance of the situation. But sometimes people don't realise, you know, it can be just down to we all have different communication preferences.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
we've done our like colours and stuff like that at some point. If you are very driven and to the point and blunt, that can be really difficult to a person who is all about people and a bit touchy-feely, you know, and it's
so like
you know,
a clash of personalities or clash of way of working, and actually you both probably need to move in that, you know, not necessarily move jobs, but move the way that you're communicating, the way you're interacting.
Yeah,
because inevitably in whatever role you're in, there are people that you like and you get on with really well, and there are people where you have to sort of
yeah.
how can I do that better, or what can I do that, and sometimes you almost don't have the time to think, and you just sort of think,
Yeah, but in one-to-one coaching, I do spend a lot of time with people, often preparing them for those sorts of conversations. You know, that like they'll usually be like, oh, I want to come to you because I'm more confident, and quite quickly we get to the crux of it. Might be a particular individual that they find particularly difficult, and then we can pick apart how do you prepare yourself for that situation, because what can happen is once your mind has decided that person's a difficult person, you might be somebody that feels like they're always going to have to go into battle, or you might feel like somebody who just like, I'm just going to avoid that situation altogether. So it's like how you can sort of what's the word, train your brain really to be less scared of that situation, or react how you want.
Almost try and get yourself to a point where it's an opportunity, not a disaster. And that really isn't that easy. I can think of one of the tricks I did where I had it was actually a supplier contact who I really struggled with. I actually just took the time one day to go and see them and have a chat with them, because it was becoming so frustrating that it just wasn't working. But actually taking the time out was great, because you then had a conversation and also a conversation with in their organisation, and found different ways of doing, and that was just a lovely, great. You know, when I think about it now, it was a great turnaround. I think what's also happened since, without being funny, you and I were years ago, that this nice positive of when people are doing PDRs, they are judged on their relationships as well as their outputs. Whereas going back years ago, it was all about outputs, wasn't it? So it's really nice now, or proper, and a great direction that people get weighed by their relationships as well as by their outputs. And the more of that, in my book, the better.
The more strategic partnerships is a lot better way of working for everybody, isn't it?
Yeah, but you know, doesn't happen without work, effort, and energy. It's not going to happen overnight. So, what have you been your light bulb moments in the last 3 years that have really given you joy in terms of?
Well, that's a good question, Debbie. So I guess, right, so from a personal perspective, I would say, and this goes for anybody watching this as well, the things that I thought were my weaknesses were actually my strengths. So I would say the fact that I had worked across all of those different functions meant that I was flaky. I couldn't hold a job down, even though I knew I was really good at every single one. That's what I thought everybody would think of me. And the reality is actually the opposite. It gave me a breadth of experience that has really stood me in good stead for doing what I do now. And I think, and there's other strength, you know, the strength of building a network, stuff like that. I think when I was in a corporate job, I spent a lot of time trying to work on my weaknesses. And now I work for myself. I just work with my strengths and get other people to do the weaknesses. But I encourage what I've learned, and this is a light bulb moment for the clients that I work with, say thinking about women in the food industry, is that we all need to do the same, right? Because we're really good at berating ourselves, and people use the words like imposter syndrome and all of that sort of stuff. And I used to I still have imposter syndrome, but we were talking about it before we went on air as well, that that means you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. It's a good thing. And I think as long as you are playing to your strengths and you're not, we're talking about that hamster wheel and ending up in a position doing something that you don't really enjoy, then it's okay to keep pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. So my example, and one of the things I work with a lot of women on, is because I tend to work with women kind of mid-career, but I work with lots of different women, but I seem to attract people the same age as me, really. So 35 to 55, I'm somewhere in between those. And, we get to a point where we go, how did I end up here? Is this even what I want to do? What is the flipping meaning of life? And that's what a lot of women come. So I think one of the light bulb moments is we all feel like that, right? That we all get to that stage at different stages, but pretty much in that window of time. And what you wanted when you were in your 20s might not be what you want anymore, and that's okay. Like, it changes. And I think the other light bulb moment for me, they're all the same, they're all around the same theme, but is how many women that were like me as well, that wanted to jack it all in and just leave the food industry altogether. Like, this is it. I just don't even want to do this anymore. It's too hard. It's too this, it's too that. But with a bit of personal development work and a bit of coaching, I've actually realised that wasn't the case at all. And they just needed to tweak a few things, start saying no to the odd thing, start doing a bit more, getting a bit more work-life balance in, stop doing all the office admin, or, whatever it is for that person. And so many people come to me and they're like, I'm going to leave this job. I can't do it anymore. And then by the time I've ended coaching with them, they've got promoted and they're staying where they are because they love it. And
it's the people thing, isn't it? I mean, for me, when I look back, the things that matter most are the interactions I've had with people and the joy that's come from that.
And I love nothing more than seeing other people succeed. That's my thing.
But you also very much resonate with this thing that you have to accept that actually what you need and what you want and what's reality changes over time. Back to so when I was in my 20s, I was incredibly competitive. I was going to absolutely nail this job if it killed me, both physically and mentally. The passion and the power and the energy. And then as you grow older, you hopefully get a bit more sense and balance and the ability to
Well, and I think that is part of it. Like, I was in my 20s, I was work hard, play hard, going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And I always think, because I had that burnout. I was 34 when I burnt out. And then I got divorced as well. That happened quite quickly after, even though I'd only just got married. All of that life stuff happened to me, and it just made me completely reassess. And then I had a daughter late in life, relatively. So I was 40 when I had my daughter. And all of those things make you look at life differently. And I probably would say, like, I'd say to myself, oh, well, I don't want to go out and I don't want to do that industry dinner or this, that, and the other. Oh, it must be because I'm a mum. And then I've got loads of friends that haven't got kids and they don't want to do it either. Like, it's a life stage and an age thing. I think it's that comparison thing. Oh, well, if I didn't have kids, then I'd be able to do it. But would you really want to do it anyway?
Yeah. And I think it's about sort of the hints and tips about how you structure life and working and what's acceptable. And having the ability or the right to say, right, well, we won't have 8 o'clock meetings because they don't work for me and the kids. Let's have 3 o'clock afternoon teas, or but do it in a positive way, such that you're suggesting something that might work better than what we have now. And I think the nice thing about COVID and being shut up and everything, it has given us the opportunity to interact differently, particularly with people that we know. I still find it quite hard to have virtual meetings with people who don't know very well. But
I've built a whole business on it, Debbie.
Sorry.
I built a whole business on meeting people I didn't know, and because I set up a business in lockdown, I had to network like that. And it's interesting because I don't really like in-person networking events, which is ironic because I'm going to do one in a couple of months' time. Because I struggle with chit chat and this, that, and the other, but I love a one-to-one interaction. So for me, it was easier for me to build my network via Teams and via Zoom.
And I would say the same. I get more out of a one-to-one relationship, either meeting virtually or in person. But I do push myself to go to events to network, because it's the joy of the unexpected and the connectivity of the unexpected that actually gives you a bit of a buzz. But there is a question about what is special about the food industry. And to be fair, we've both worked in different parts of the food industry. But for me, it's the fact that at the end of the day, I eat. I'm really interested in food, and I also find the dynamic pace of the food industry actually quite energizing, at times incredibly frustrating, but it is almost like being given a puzzle to solve, and you never quite get it right, but you can make better, get yourself to a point where you're making better judgments. But for me, I've been more at the growing end of things. I've just found it totally fascinating, and actually the changes now with technology and things that you can control, it just make it such a magical and an amazing industry to work in. And I wouldn't change industry by a long way, because at the end of the day, you have to eat. Have you anything else to add to that, Amy? What am I missing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I absolutely was like, I just want to get out of this industry. But like the women that I worked with, it turned out that it wasn't the industry that I work with now. It's not necessarily the industry. It was the boundaries. I was in a job that wasn't giving me joy. I wanted to be about the people. I didn't want to be flogging cream cakes. So I think all those things that you say about the food industry being special, I completely resonate. But the other thing is, I think it's full of really great people, and I didn't want to walk away from those people. And what I found was, it happened organically. I started to coach people that were, within my network. It was like, first of all, it was people I'd worked with, then it was people that had worked at the same business as me, but I didn't know. And I was also coaching people in the NHS, this, that, and the other, because in your coach training, you do a lot of hours to get the practice. And what I found was I was lit up in the conversations that I was having with people that worked in food, and they loved it because they could shortcut. They didn't need to say to me, this is what a PLR means, or this is what a stage gate process means, or any of that. So it just feels easy for me to coach people in that industry. Whereas when people were talking about the NHS and using all their jargon, I just didn't get it. So that was part of the reason. But absolutely, I just think I'm very much I've skirted over what happened in my burnout. It was awful, it was horrible, and it was life-changing. And I think for me, to be able to help other people avoid that, it doesn't make it better that it happened, but it gives it some purpose for me in my overall life, really. So I think that's why I didn't just go, sod it, I'm leaving.
Yeah, but also, totally the thing about the people, but I also think the opportunities. I think the food industry is such a diverse, big, complex machine. However, and you could, like you have when you were younger, you've tried different aspects of it, be it MPD, be it marketing, be it commercial. So if you actually find there is a role that you're doing that it isn't rocking your boat, it isn't that difficult to change into a different discipline. Because I changed discipline. I was 20 years actually a field walking agronomist working with farmers. And I thought, I can't do this in this way for the rest of my life. I need to do something else. I've got things I want to do and skills I want to develop. So I was actually lucky that I was able to morph into being a technical manager and then work for Sainsburys and for PepsiCo in a technical manner. But back to your point, what was great was having a good grounding, because you have got some back pocket skills to take wherever.
Yeah.
I suspect that's probably true in other industries. It's just that without being funny, you and I have come from the food industry.
Yeah, we don't know anything else. Me and Lucy always say that on the podcast. We're like, well, the food industry is like this, and we're like, well, possibly other industries are like that, but we don't know. We've never worked in them.
I don't know exactly. So we can only really talk from our point of view. But there are an awful lot of us and an awful lot of opportunities, I think.
Yeah, and I'd say the other thing is that, so I was like 20 odd years in, my commercial marketing development process roles, all in own label manufacturing, all in chilled. And since I've moved into this job, obviously I've widened up that my lens, really. Like there are sections of the industry that become quite insular, and actually I've loved working with like bakery and a bit of produce and just there's lots of different arms of the industry where even if you want to stay in the same discipline, a lot of people I work with work in MPD, but you can just go and change to a completely different category and learn that. So there's always something new to learn. And I think that works with my brain, to be honest.
Yeah. There's a comment about what has been the most challenging thing for you, Amy, in setting up your own business.
Keeping the faith. So the early days were hard. Like people are like, oh, you're doing so well. It looks like it was really easy. And I'm like, it really wasn't. Like there were plenty of Sunday nights when I was in tears, like, because I built it from nothing, and yes, I had a bit of a network, but it wasn't an amazing network. So it's been building that network. I mean, I'm just about to get to 10,000 connections on LinkedIn. And when I started 3 years ago, I had 500. So building that network has been so important, but it's also been a challenge. I was talking to somebody the other day that's just set up his own business, and it's everybody, when you do it, everybody, like the people that you used to work with and stuff like that, you're not going to get work with them straight away, the people that you've just worked with or whatever, but everyone goes on about how brilliant you are and how it's going to be great, and then they don't give you any paying work. You're like, because they can't, or they're not in a position to. But for instance, I was at Bakkavor. I will be back in Bakkavor this year doing some stuff for them. It's 3 years later. But it can be very hard, and a lot of people give up, and I had a bit of a financial buffer. It was lockdown, so I didn't have anywhere to spend any money anyway. But I had to live very frugally for that first year to get me through. And my partner had to put up with quite a lot of tears and me going, I'm just going to have to go back into a category role and it's all awful. And then the next day I'd get a new piece of work, and now I'm saying I haven't got enough time to do it all. How am I going to scale my business?
Yeah, no, it's certainly. So we've now, believe it or not, been talking for nearly 45 minutes, and we probably ought to take the last question for this evening, which is, what are your 3 non-negotiables?
Oh, wow. Right, okay. Non-negotiables at work or in life.
Start with work.
So It's an interesting one, and I'm hesitating because this sort of links to the first question, the question about challenging things to set up your own business. When I started, I said yes to everything, and now I have a filter, and I still find it really hard to say no to things. But actually working, and it links to what you were saying before, Debbie, as well, about bullying. And there are some amazing businesses in the food industry, but there are some that are quite toxic. And my filter is now I don't want to work with those kinds of businesses. So that I think that's my first non-negotiable would be I only really want to work with businesses that are aligned with what I'm about. And I'm in a lucky position to be able to do that now. And then can my other two be personal ones that are sort of linked to work? One is that I find balance and do something every week that is just for me. Even if it is, this morning, I sat in the garden and had a cup of tea in silence for 10 minutes, because I think that's what work-life balance is about. And the other one is that my partner loads and unloads the flipping dishwasher every day, because otherwise, because I feel like I've not covered the women can have it all enough, but that is a point. Like, we need to start not doing everything ourselves. So getting that balance and doing stuff for yourself is so important in it all.
And having both the right and the ability to persuade other people to do things. I think that's absolutely what you've talked about. So I think we should probably wrap it up at that. Thank you very, very much. I think that's been a most enlightening chat. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Me too. My absolute pleasure.
No, great. And I look forward to the next. Talk about your podcast and where you can find them.
Oh, so it's called Oh for Food's Sake, and you can find it pretty much in all the places that you would find podcasts, so like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and stuff like that. And there's also, if you go on Facebook, there is a Facebook community called the Oh for Fake. I can never say it without slipping up. Oh for Food's Sake community.
Brilliant. Okay. So I also need to say that the beginning of next month, which is August, already, one of my colleagues in Women in Food and Farming, Kirsty, will be talking to Barbara Bray, who we both know, who's an amazing nutritionist. And she's actually going to talk about appropriate nutrition for different stages of life, about which she's currently doing a PhD, I think.
Barbara's amazing. We had her on the podcast. I've been on her podcast. Oh. Nobody listened to that because I was talking about my battles with weight, so you don't want to listen to that.
She's amazing, and she's always got a lovely smile and a positive vibe about what you can do and do differently. So definitely recommend that one. It's on the first Tuesday of August. It will be going live at 5:30 till 6:30 as this is done. But and by the time we get to September, we've then got a live and in-person event at Savills. I've actually forgotten the date, but that would be a great event as well, which Christine is organising. So we've got lots to look forward to. So have a lovely summer, everybody. If you're going on holiday, enjoy it. Preferably in some nice, gentle, warm place with a cup of tea or a glass of something. So, thank you very much. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. See you later.
Okay. Bye.